Guys, I've recently come across the TV show The Power that I had been sleeping on, and we need to talk about it, especially because it's very similar to what I was talking about in my last video about the power of the womb and us as women coming into our power of creativity and intuition and all that kind of stuff. Now, this show came out in 2022, and I only found out about it this last month because I was on TikTok looking for something new to watch, and one of the girls on there mentioned this show. She didn't even go into too much detail, but I was very interested into the premise of it. Came out in 2022. It was a book from 2018. When I watched this, I was like in awe. And I'm very confused as to why there isn't a season two. But then when I start to go into the details of this show, I think it will become very clear why there isn't a season two. The same old nonsense that when it comes to women, like women's health, not enough research is made into it. Look at our anatomy and the things and possibilities that can be made and done with our bodies, and we don't know enough about it. It's like we know more about the space and and the ocean, which are just as magnificent in themselves, but our bodies, so are they, and yet we don't have enough research. So, anyways, this show is about young girls who come into their power. And this power is essentially electricity that comes through their hands. And it's just so interesting how the world around them is threatened, right? Because at the end of the day, we live in a man's world. Like, for anyone to say that we don't, you're being ridiculous. We live in a man's world. So it's very interesting how us having this level of power makes them uncomfortable. And it goes back to, as a black person, as black people, when we come into our power, when we speak our truth, when we get together to get our resources and all that kind of stuff, it makes our oppressors think that we are going to do unto them what they did unto us. They think it's just about violence. They think it's about taking what they have. And this show made me think of a lot of things. And actually, recently I saw a reel on TikTok that had a woman wearing the Handmaid's Tale outfit, and on top of it, on top of her there was like a load of titles of recent news happenings that made it feel like the world is like the Handmaid's Tale. And someone commented, how did we go backwards? And essentially I was saying, well, actually, you know, because there isn't enough people speaking up, because we're just complicit, which I don't think is 100% true. I actually just think that we are fighting to be equal in a world and a system that wasn't made for us. At the end of the day, we can't be equal in a system that is made for men. We live in a man's world. One of the lines actually in this show, was said by a man in Nigeria. So the beauty about this show is that it shows how different parts of the world react to women having some power. And there's a guy in Nigeria who's actually someone who I did a show with many years ago. He's amazing. He says, wow, this is probably the first time in history that women will have an equal playing field. Can you imagine? It takes us having literal power to be in the same playing field. And yeah, so I'm going to get into it a little bit. So as it's separated into different countries, we see how different countries react to women. So in one of the countries, Saudi Arabia, we've got Nigeria, there's an Eastern European country that they don't actually mention where it is. There is the US and the UK. In Saudi Arabia, there is so actually one of the things is that why are women having these powers? They don't understand why women are having these powers. So they're doing all these studies and stuff, and one of the hypotheses they came across was the young girls, so it was only young girls that were having this power, like teenagers in their puberty. They are creating this power almost as a defense mechanism of the result of how the world treats them, of how the world is so it's not a safe space for women, and so they've had to create this power. And it made me think about like when I was in my teen years, coming into my teen years, and like a lot of us girls will know this. You come into a moment where when you go outside, it feels exceptionally dangerous. And it doesn't matter what you're wearing. It doesn't matter what you look like. Because you can tell that the men out there, some of the men out there, they are just predators. And we just feel like prey. So I remember there came a time where I used to put keys in between my knuckles because I was like, if anyone comes at me, it's one quick swift punch and that's it, game over. So this is what this feels like. And so in Saudi Arabia, there was this little girl. She couldn't have been more than like 15, and she was just playing around with her power, like this excitement of like sparking things and whatever. And a group of boy walks across and they see this and they're like, what are you doing? You know you're not allowed to do this, da, da, da. And they beat her to a pulp. They beat her so much that I think she actually died. And this immediately created an uprising. The women in there, they started rallying, protesting. They walked with her to the hospital. They followed the car to the hospital, and immediately the men were like, what on earth is going on? So they get their tanks because that's the only reaction they have. They just think about war. So they get their tanks and they're ready to fight these women, but actually their weapons, and the thing is, like, they were not, women initially were not using their power as weapons. They weren't. They essentially had to as a result of how the world reacted to their newfound power. And so there were moments where like the girls would harass and bully some of these men with their powers because yeah, it's so interesting. So then we go into Eastern Europe, and this place in Eastern Europe, it doesn't really specify where it is, but it's somewhere where it's like the sex trafficking hub of the world. So there's loads of camps where women are held to be sold and be slaves, essentially. And there was a point in the series where the camps were now no longer having young women, and the women in there, the elder women, were like, what's going on? Like, they love young fresh blood. Why is there no young women in here? Eventually they discovered that there's a power that's going on. At this point, elder women don't develop the power, right? The young women develop it, the elder women don't. However, it can be transferred, which is something these men didn't know. And as soon as there was a young girl who was deaf, and again, she was disregarded, right? So she was allowed to get into the camp just to bring food to those other elder women. In that moment, they transfer the power. She transferred the power to them. And guys, when I tell you the revolution of that moment, the way these women came together like an army, that scene, it was like a breath of fresh air. It really, really was. Then in the US, again, like, women coming into their power, it's very unnerving to men. I don't know if unnerving is the right word, but they have no control. So one of the things that they did was they would go to schools and incarcerate. I feel like America loves incarceration and murder. So they incarcerated these young girls in their school. So they go to the school and they call each girl individually to go to the hall, and they were put into this box. Also in that same America, in America, there was a scene of there's a family that is followed, and this family is a political family, and there's two siblings. So the girl gets the power, and the brother is, again, very interesting to see how he becomes radicalized. So there's a moment where they have like a sibling fight and she accidentally burns him. The way this boy changed up real quick. He became radicalized and started watching videos of the likes of Andrew Tate, let's just say for the sake of comparison, almost like he became like this involuntary celibate type vibe that you can imagine. About no, if they have this power, it means that we will no longer have this and we will no longer have that. But why does us having power and control of ourselves and our bodies have anything to do with you? Do you know what I mean? It's just so bizarre. It's so bizarre. There's also another scene of a girl in America, which I somehow, it left my mind, where she was in the foster care system, and I think she was either in foster care or adopted by this family. And as she was a black girl, she goes into a white family. And as you know, sometimes from the stories you hear, that these families are actually very dangerous, in the sense of like the men as well being predators sexually. And you know, the man in the family was getting ready to grape the girl, and the woman just, she would put the music up high so she wouldn't listen to anything and whatever, and she had to use her power, and she used her power against the man. Because what you gonna do you know what I mean? And lastly, the UK. This girl, she was my favorite because she was a rare bull. So she was a lesbian girl, or maybe she was bi. And she also comes from like and the point, there's a reason why I need to make a point of her sexuality, because all of us, as we know, our intersections of who we are as people and what we look like to the world affect how the world reacts to us, and therefore it will affect how we react to the world, right? So I can imagine she's probably faced many injustices in many different ways, or been belittled and all these kinds of things. So she moves with a lot of rage. She has a lot to prove. She's got a lot of bravado. She's like, she needs to prove that she's a big dog, which she is in her own right anyway. She really is. So I, again, just found it amazing how she was just like, she didn't give two shits. Like, her power, I personally feel like she already was in her power because she just said it how it is. And when she got it, it was just an extension of that. What do you think about this show? Has anyone here seen this show? Why has this show not continued? Like, I feel like we need to protest, have a petition to bring it back, because it was asking the right questions, really and truly. It was opening that conversation. Essentially, the system in itself needs to be changed. If we're never going to be equal based on this system, on this capitalist patriarchal system that we live in. It wouldn't work. It doesn't work because it's been built to only serve the men. You know, way back when it was created, men were the ones who'd go out to work, men were the ones who would make money, men, you know. So for us to want the same thing as them, it doesn't make sense because it doesn't serve us in the way that it serves them. I think I spoke about the main things anyway, and it just brings me to, again, like the necessity of us just knowing who we are and being rooted in who we are, especially in this world that hasn't been designed for us. Yeah, I think that's really important. But guys, any thoughts? Like, did you like this show? What didn't you like about this show? Why don't they bring this show back? Do you think this show needs to return? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it.